In the spring of 2017, in a borrowed conference room at a research extension office outside Hollister in San Benito County, California, a soil scientist named Dale Voss looked across a folding table at a young woman with dirt under her fingernails and told her kindly that she was throwing away a real future for a hobby. He had a doctorate and 22 years of yield trials behind him, and he was not a cruel man. He genuinely believed what he said. He told her that nobody made a living on 6 acres of an old crop. Nobody asked for any more, that the market wanted uniform white bulbs from overseas at a price she could never touch, and that the smartest thing a person could do with a head full of biology was finish the degree she had walked away from and let the land go to someone who could farm it at scale. He had a printout in front of him, a single sheet of trial averages he had brought to be helpful, and he turned it. She could read it. And he tapped the column that showed what the commodity market paid for a pound of white bulb garlic out of the ground. It was a number a person could not live on at 6 acres, and he wanted her to see it the way he saw it. "This is a hobby," he told her, and the word came out soft the way you might hand a child back a drawing, a fine hobby. But a hobby will not carry a mortgage. The young woman's name was Nora Aldous. She was 26. She had quit her 3rd year of medical school 11 months earlier, and she had a notebook in her bag that had belonged to her grandmother. And she looked at his printout for a while, and then she said one thing, which was that his column measured the bulb and not the cure. And she did not explain what she meant, and she gathered the notebook back into her bag and drove home and kept planting. 7 years later, in the autumn of 2024, the same 6 acres of ground carried no debt at all. The last note on the family land had been paid in full from a single line of fermented product that 3 of the best kitchens in the state could not get enough of. And Dale Voss was standing in Nora's curing barn with his hat in his hands, asking if he could write down how she did it. This is the story of the years between those 2 rooms, and of a grandmother's notebook, and of a kind of knowing that does not show up on a spreadsheet until the day it suddenly does. Stay with me, because the number at the end of it is smaller than you would expect and heavier than it looks. Let me tell you about the ground first, because the ground is where this begins. The Aldous place sat in a fold of the valley, where the Coast Range broke the wind. 40 acres in total, most of it leased out to a neighbor in row lettuce, and 6 acres along the eastern bench that nobody had touched with a tractor in a decade. Nora's grandmother, Vera, had grown garlic there. Not the soft, papery garlic of the grocery shelf, but hard-necked strains she had carried west in a coffee can in 1961, strains with names Vera had written in a steady, slanted hand in a cloth-bound notebook, a purple-striped variety. She called the Krakow line after the city. Her mother left, a porcelain type with 4 fat cloves to a head, a marbled strain that took the cold, and threw a hard central stalk every June. Vera had been a small woman with forearms like a fence builder, and she had been known in that valley for 2 things: keeping her mouth shut and growing garlic that kept hard and sound until the following summer, and the second thing was the reason the first carried any weight. She had died when Nora was 19, the spring before college, in the chair by the wood stove where she did her curing, and the notebook had gone into a kitchen drawer under the twine and the seed envelopes, and the garlic had kept coming up every year on its own, out of cloves nobody harvested, going half wild along the bench, smaller each season but never gone. That stubbornness mattered later. Hold on to it. When Nora came home from medical school, she did not come home with a plan. She came home with a kind of exhaustion that had a shape she could not name. years and 8 months into a path that had looked like the only sensible path a girl good at biology could take. And she had stood in an anatomy lab February morning with a scalpel and understood with total clarity that she did not want to spend her life inside buildings under that particular light. Her father, Glenn, did not understand it. Glenn Aldous had spent 30 years driving a propane delivery route through the county and leasing the family flat ground to keep it, and he had carried a quiet pride that his daughter would be a doctor, the first Aldous to wear a white coat instead of a work coat, and when she told him she was done, he did not yell. He set his coffee cup down and looked at the table a long while and asked her only whether she had thought about what it cost, and she knew he did not mean the tuition. Then he got very quiet, and the quiet went on for months, and it was worse than yelling would have been. He thought she had thrown something away that could not be gotten back. He was, in his own way, the first doubter, though never the cruel one, and the slow thaw between them is one of the threads worth watching. Nora started with the notebook. Let me tell you what was in it, because this is the engine of everything that followed. Vera had not just written down what she planted. She had written down why. There were pages on what the old country growers called the second skin, the wrapper layers of a garlic head, and how a hardneck variety cured slowly in moving air would hold those wrappers tight and seal the cloves against rot for 10 months, while a soft neck, pushed for size and shelf weight, went soft by spring. There were pages on soil, on how garlic pulled heavily from the ground and gave almost nothing back. So Vera had never grown at the same place twice in 4 years, rotating it behind a legume that fixed nitrogen in the soil, which is to say a plant that pulls nitrogen out of the air through bacteria on its roots and leaves the ground richer than it found it. And there were pages, careful pages, on fermentation, on black garlic, which is not rotted garlic and not burned garlic, but whole heads, held at a low steady warmth and high humidity for weeks, until the sugars and amino acids brown through a slow reaction that chemists call the Maillard process. The same browning that darkens a seared steak, only stretched across 40 days instead of 4 minutes, turning the cloves soft and dark and sweet as date, paced with none of the raw bite. Nothing is added, and nothing is taken away. It is only heat and time and patience, the 3 things a commodity buyer has no way to put on a scale. Vera had done it in a warming box behind her wood stove. She had written the temperatures down, 60 degrees Celsius, give or take, for 6 weeks, then a month of rest. Nora read those pages until the spine of the notebook went soft. Now the conventional advice in that valley, the advice Dale Voss gave and believed, was not stupid advice. That is the thing people get wrong about this story. The valley grew lettuce and garlic for the commodity market, because the commodity market was real money, and the way you survived in it was scale and uniformity and contracts. Hundreds of acres of one thing, machines that cost more than a house, a buyer who took everything you grew at a price, set in an office you would never see. Voss had watched a dozen small growers try to go their own way and fail, and he had the trial data to prove that the boutique path, as he called it, was a liability, a romantic mistake that ended in foreclosure. When he looked at Nora's 6 acres of half-eye-old hardneck garlic, he saw a young woman about to learn an expensive lesson, and he wanted to spare her. The tragedy of the man was that his kindness and his blindness were the same organ. Let me tell you about the neighbor, because his path runs alongside hers the whole way, and you need to see them together. His name was Russ Tilley, and he leased the Aldous flat ground and farmed 400 acres of his own besides. And in 2018, Russ did exactly what every advisor told him to do. He borrowed against his land to buy a new self-propelled harvester, a green machine that cost $210,000 and could lift and top an acre of garlic in the time it took Nora to hand-pull a single bed. And he planted in his whole acreage to one high-demand soft-neck variety under contract with a national packer, the kind of clean, confident move that makes a banker lean back and smile. Russ was not a fool, and he was not a villain. He was a good farmer doing the smart thing, the thing the numbers said to do. And for 3 years, it looked like the smart thing. His fields were beautiful, rows so straight and Ferments. They looked drawn with a ruler, the harvester moving down them at dusk like a ship. At the county meetings, he would clap Glenn on the shoulder and ask, not unkindly, when Nora was going to stop playing in the dirt and grow something a packer would actually take. He asked it twice over those years. The second time was louder, at a grower association dinner, in the winter of 2020, with 30 people at the long tables, and he said it warm and grinning, the way a man teases family. It's a nice little hobby your girl's got, Glenn, he said, but a hobby don't make the note. And Nora, 2 seats down, set her fork against her plate and said the dirt suited her fine. And the room laughed the gentle laugh of people watching a girl make a mistake they were too polite to name. The label they fastened on her was the same label every time. A hobby. Here is what they could not see. While Russ planted one variety across hundreds of uniform acres, Nora was building something the opposite of uniform. She put in all 4 of Vera's hardneck strains, and 2 more she traded for at a seed exchange in the Sierra foothills. 6 varieties on 6 acres, each in its own block, rotated behind field peas, the way the notebook said. She planted by hand in October, on her knees in the cool-turned ground, clove by clove, pointed end up, 4 inches down, 6 inches apart, and the work took 3 weeks, and her knees bruised, and her back seized up at night, and her father watched from the cab of his truck at the field edge and said nothing, though he started leaving a thermos of coffee on the fence post in the mornings, which was the first thing that was not silence. She harvested in July, pulled and bundled the whole plants in bunches of 10, and hung them from the rafters in the old curing barn, where the slatted walls let the dry valley wind move through, exactly as Vera had written, and she did not chase size. A commodity grower chased size, because the packer paid by weight. Nora chased the wrappers, the 3 or 4 tight papery layers that sealed each head against the air, because a head with sound wrappers cured in moving air would keep hard and whole for 10 months, while a fat, soft bulb went to dust by spring. By the second autumn, she had more cured garlic than she could sell, fresh braids hanging the length of the barn. And that was when she opened her grandmother's notebook to the pages on the warming box and decided to find out if the old woman had been right about the slow, dark transformation. She built a curing chamber out of a chest freezer wired to a controller and a pan of water, and she held 6 varieties of whole heads at that steady low warmth for 6 weeks, checking the temperature against Vera's written figures every morning. And at the end of it, she lifted the lid on cloves, the color of strong coffee, soft enough to spread, sweet and deep with a finish like aged balsamic and tamarind and good soy. She ate one, standing in the barn at 6 in the morning, and then she sat down on an overturned crate and read the warming box page again and understood that her grandmother had not been making a treat. She had been making something that turned a perishable crop into a thing that could not be matched by anyone buying garlic by the truckload. She had made something the valley had no name for and no market for. And that was about to become the whole point. She started small, a folding table at a farmer's market in Carmel on Saturday mornings, fresh braids and a few small jars of the dark cloves nobody recognized, and most people walked past it. Then a chef on his day off stopped at the table, a lean man who cooked at a place with a month-long waiting list, and he tried a clove off the sample plate and went completely still, the way a person goes still when something rearranges what they thought they knew, and he asked where she got it. And he did not quite believe her when she said she made it in a chest freezer in a barn. He bought every jar on the table. He told another chef, who told a third. By 2021, she was selling fresh hard-neck garlic by the braid and black garlic by the small jar to a handful of kitchens up and down the coast, and the money was thin, but it was real money that arrived every month. And she had paid down a little of the note for the first time in the land's history, and her father had started, without ever announcing it, to come out and help her bundle in July. I will say here, if you have ever walked away from the sensible path and had someone you love go quiet about it, you already know what was passing between Glenn and Nora in that barn without a word. Hold that. We come back to it. Then the next generation arrived skeptical, which in this story was not a child but a cousin. Nora's cousin Mara came out from the city in the summer of 2021, 24 years old, with a fresh degree in agricultural economics and a job offer from the very packer Russ sold to. And Mara loved Nora and was embarrassed by her in equal measure. Mara walked the 6 acres with a tablet and ran the numbers out loud. The yield per acre against the commodity rate. And the numbers were brutal. She told Nora plainly that on paper the operation made no sense, that 6 varieties on 6 acres was an inefficiency a real business would never tolerate. That diversity was just a word people used when they could not commit to the winning product. She used the word inefficient, and she meant it as love, the way Voss had meant hobby as love. She sided with the experts, because the experts had taught her, and she had no reason yet to doubt them. Nora did not argue. She handed Mara a clove of black garlic and went back to work, and that clove was the first crack, though neither of them knew it. Let me tell you about diversity. Since Mara called it inefficiency, because the notebook had an answer to that, and the answer is the spine of everything that comes next. A field planted to one variety is a field with one immune system. Garlic is vulnerable to a soil-borne rot, called white rot, a fungus that can sit dormant in the ground for 20 years. And then, in the right, wet, cool spring, wake up and move through a uniform planting, like fire through dry grass. Because every plant in that field is genetically identical, and what kills one kills all. A diverse planting, 6 varieties with 6 different tolerances, rotated, so the same ground never carried garlic. 2 years running was not romance. It was a firewall. Vera had written it in 1974. In her slanted hand, a sentence Nora had read 100 times. Plant many kinds, and the year that takes one will spare another. Mara, running her clean numbers, had no column for that sentence. The spreadsheet had no cell for the cost of the year that hadn't come yet. There was one more public dismissal before the year that came. In February of 2023, at the same extension office where it had all started, Dale Voss gave a winter talk on the garlic market. And Nora sat in the back row, and afterward he found her by the coffee urn and asked with real warmth how the project was going. She told him she was making black garlic now and selling it to restaurants. And he nodded the way a kind man nods at news he does not respect. And he said he was glad it gave her satisfaction, that everyone needed a hobby that paid for itself, and that the door at the university was still open if she ever wanted real work. He meant it as generosity. It was the 3rd time the word had been set down in front of her, like a drawing handed back. And it was the last time, because the weather was already turning, and the ground was about to settle the question that no amount of talking ever could. Then came the spring of 2023, and the year that takes one arrived. It came as weather first. The winter of 2022 into 2023 was the wettest the valley had seen in 3 decades. Storm stacked on storm, the rivers up over the bottoms, the cool, wet ground staying cool and wet clear into April. For most crops, it was merely a hard year. For garlic, it was the exact condition the dormant fungus had been waiting 20 years for. White rot woke up across the valley, and the fields it moved through fastest were the big uniform contract fields, hundreds of acres of a single genetically identical variety, planted on the same ground, season after season, because the contract demanded continuity. And Russ Tilley's 400 acres were among the worst hit. The fungus does not announce itself early. It works at the root plate underground, while the tops still look fine. So a grower can walk a field in May and see green and feel safe, and then watch it collapse in June, the leaves yellowing from the base up, the bulbs going soft and watery in the ground. A white cottony fuzz of fungal threads and a scatter of tiny, dark resting bodies in the soil, each one a seed of the disease that meant that ground was finished for garlic for a generation. Russ walked his big field on a Tuesday in early June, and it was green. He walked it again the following Monday, and the low end had gone yellow as straw. He lost most of a 400-acre planting in under 3 weeks, and the contract that depended on delivering it went with it, and there was nothing his $200,000 harvester could do but sit in the shed, because you cannot harvest a crop that has rotted at the root. He had the harvester payment, and the operating loan, and the contract penalty, and field he could not plant to garlic again in his working lifetime. And he was a good man watching a smart decision turn to ruin through no laziness of his own. He had done everything the experts said. The experts had simply never priced the wet spring that comes once in 20 years. The same wet spring moved on to Nora's 6 acres too. It took one block. The marbled strain in the lowest, wettest corner went down, perhaps an acre of one variety. And Nora knelt in that corner in the rain and pulled a plant and saw the white threads webbed across the rotting base and felt the size of what could have been if she had planted the way the valley planted. The rot stopped at the edge of that block. The 5 other varieties, each with its own different tolerance, standing on ground that had not carried garlic the year before. Because the rotation forbade it, held green and finished clean and cured sound in July. The firewall held. She lost roughly a sixth of 1 year. Russ lost most of everything. To the bank, the difference between them was a credit rating. To the valley, it was something else entirely, and the valley was beginning quietly to understand which. Mara was there that June. She had come for a weekend and stayed through the collapse, and she stood at the fence line, where the aldous bench met the least flat, and watched her cousin lose one wet corner, while the neighbor, with all the right advice, lost his livelihood across the road. And the spreadsheet in her head grew a column it had never had, the column for the year that doesn't come on schedule. She walked the 5 clean blocks with Nora and asked why this one held and that one fell, and Nora answered in Vera's words without dressing them up. Mara was quiet a long time. Then she asked to see the page. She read the page about the many kinds and the year that spares another, written in 1974 in a dead woman's slanted hand. And she read it twice, and she set it down and asked Nora to show how the curing chamber held its temperature through a hot afternoon. That was the conversion, not announced. Just begun, the educated doubter, turning her clean hands to the slow work. Now the demand. Because while the valley's garlic was rotting in the ground, the black garlic Nora had been quietly making. For 3 years had found the people who understood it. A buyer named Priya Sen, the head purchaser for a small group of celebrated restaurants in San Francisco, had been served Nora's black garlic by a chef who would not say where it came from. And she had spent 4 months tracking it back to a chest freezer in a curing barn in San Benito County. Priya arrived in the autumn of 2023 in a plain gray car with city plates, and she did not look like much. A small woman in a wool coat with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she walked the curing barn slowly, with her hands behind her back, looking at the braids and the jars and the chest freezer chamber humming in the corner. Then she did the thing the best judges do. She said almost nothing. She asked for 1 clove, and Nora gave her one from an open jar, and Priya held it up to the light from the slatted wall, turned it, and ate it slowly, with her eyes closed, and stood in silence for what Nora later said felt like a full minute, the wind moving in the slats, the only sound in the barn. When she opened her eyes, she did not say it was good. She asked one question. She asked how much finished black garlic Nora could make in a year, without buying a single head from anyone else, without leasing one more acre, without scaling past her own 6 acres, without changing one thing about how it was grown or cured. Nora told her the honest number, which was not large, a few £100. Priya took a small notebook from her coat, not unlike Vera's, and wrote in it, and then she named a price per pound, and she did not offer it as an opening position. She said it once, flat, and did not move to negotiate. And Glenn, standing by the open barn door with a bundle of garlic in his hands, set the bundle down on the bench very carefully, as if it had become breakable. Let me tell you what that price came to, and let me tell you it the way it landed, which was quietly, in a barn, with the valley wind in the slats. For the full year's production of finished black garlic from 6 acres, Priya offered a standing annual order that came to $42,000. $42,000. It does not sound like a fortune. Said in a city, it would draw a shrug, the price of a mid-range car, a year of someone's rent. The last note on the Aldous land, though. The mortgage Glenn had carried and refinanced and lost sleep over for 30 years. The very thing that had made him want his daughter safe inside a hospital instead of out in the dirt stood that autumn at $38,000. The number Priya named did not just pay a year of work. It paid the land. It cleared the note with $4,000 to spare, and it landed in that barn with a weight out of all proportion to its size, because every person standing there understood in the same instant that the 6 acres Dale Voss had called a hobby had just done in one season what the 40 acres of sensible leased ground had never managed in 30 years. Nobody spoke. Glenn kept his hand flat on the barn post, the post his own father had set in 1958, and he left it there a long while, and his face did the thing a face does when it is trying to hold still. Nora signed nothing that day. She told Priya she wanted to walk the ground first, which was a thing Vera used to say before any decision that mattered. The thing was already done, and they all knew it, and the wind kept moving in the slats. The recalibration came that winter, and it came from the man who had started it all. Dale Voss had heard, the way people hear in a small county, that the Aldous girl had paid off the land with garlic, and the scientist in him could not let it lie. He drove out in January of 2024, the same kind man, older now, and he stood in the curing barn where the 6 varieties hung, and the dark jars lined the shelf, and he asked her, plainly how, not to argue, to know Nora showed him the notebook. She showed him the rotation pages, and the white wrought firewall, and the temperatures for the slow, dark cure. And Voss, who had 22 years of yield trials and a doctorate, read a dead woman's slanted hand, and was quiet a long time. Then he said the thing that converts a doubter into a student. He asked if he could write it down. He said he had spent his whole career measuring the things that were easy to measure, yield and weight and uniformity. And he had never once had a column for the year that doesn't come, or for what a thing tastes like, or for the value of not having all your eggs in one genetic basket. And he was beginning to think. The most important things were the ones his instruments could not read. He was not humiliated. He was corrected, which is a better thing. And he became, in his last working years, an advocate for the diverse small planting he had once called a liability. What happened next is the part that matters most, because a number that only fills one family's account is just a story about money. And this was never only about money. Nora did not scale up. She was offered the chance, more than once, by people who arrived with the same confidence Voss had once carried, who wanted to put her black garlic in every specialty store in the state, who offered real investment to lease 200 acres and build a stainless facility and run the cure in computer-controlled rooms. One of them sat at the kitchen table with a contract and a projection and used the word scalable 4 times, and Nora poured him coffee and listened politely and said no, the way she had once said one quiet sentence to Dale Voss across a folding table. She'd said no every time because the notebook had taught her that the thing that made her garlic worth what it was worth was the 6 acres and the slow wind and the hand planting and the 6 varieties. And the moment she chased size, she would become the very thing the rot had punished. 400 uniform acres waiting for the wet spring. Instead, she did what Vera would have done. She kept the operation right-sized, and she gave the method away. She taught the neighbors who came asking, and they came, the same growers who had laughed at the dinner, and she sold them cloves of the 6 hardneck strains at a fair price and showed them the rotation. And the curing barn and the warming chamber, and within 2 years, there were 9 small, diverse plantings in that valley where there had been one. Russ Tilley was the first she taught. He had lost most of 400 acres and his contract and the green harvester to the bank that financed it, and he came up the Aldous Drive one evening in the autumn after the rot with his hat already in his hand. Not too proud to learn, and he stood in the barn where he had once teased her at a dinner table and asked her how she had kept her ground. She did not make him say more than that. She gave him seed garlic of 3 of the hardneck varieties, counted out into paper sacks, and a copy of the rotation pages written out in her own hand. And she walked him out to the bench and showed him the depth to plant, and the spacing, and the peas to put in ahead of it. And she told him to never grow it the same ground twice in 4 years, no matter what a contract asked. He put in 12 diverse acres that October, by hand, because he had no machine now, and he began, slowly, the long climb back. She did not gloat. She did not say one word about the dinner. She handed him the seed and showed him the depth, and went back to her own rows. And that was the whole of it. Mara stayed. The cousin who had run the brutal numbers finished out the season and never went to work for the packer. She took over the fermentation side of the operation, refined the chamber, kept the temperature logs that Vera had once kept by a wood stove, and she is the one who runs that part of it now. The educated doubter become the keeper of the craft. The notebook came out of the drawer for good. Nora and Mara copied it, page by page, the soil rotations and the wrapper science and the Maillard temperatures, and the sentence about the many kinds. And they made clean copies for every grower who wanted one, so that the knowledge Vera carried west in a coffee can in 1961 would not sit again in a drawer for a decade waiting to be needed. Glenn retired from the propane route the spring after the land was paid. He spends his mornings in the curing barn now, bundling, which he had started doing in silence years, before he could say why. He and Nora do not talk much while they work. They do not need to. The quiet between them is a different quiet than the one that filled the house the year she came home. And if you have ever earned your way back into the good silence with someone you love, you know it cannot be bought at any price, and it does not appear on any ledger, and it was worth more than the $42,000 and the land both. Let me tell you, finally, what this story is about, because it is about two kinds of knowing. And they were in that first borrowed conference room together in 2017. And neither one knew yet which would last. One kind of knowing is wide and confident and fast. It measures what can be measured. Yield per acre, weight per head, dollars per contract, and it builds clean, uniform systems that work beautifully. Right up until the season they were not built for. And then they break all at once, because everything in them is the same, and what kills one kills all. The other kind is narrow and slow and patient. It is one woman watching one piece of ground for a lifetime, and writing down in a steady, slanted hand what the ground taught her, that you plant many kinds, sow the year. That takes one will spare another. That you cure slow in moving air. That you never grow the heavy crop the same place twice. That the value of a thing is not always the value a buyer first sees. The first kind of knowing has a degree and a confident projection, and it is not evil, and it is not even usually wrong. It is only wrong at the time horizon that matters. The horizon long enough to contain the wet spring that comes once in 20 years. The second kind of knowing does not look like much. It looks like a hobby. It looks like a girl throwing away a future to play in the dirt. It looks like 6 small acres next to 400 clean ones. And then the rot comes, and the firewall holds, and a buyer goes silent with a clove on her tongue, and a number gets said quietly in a barn. Finally sees what was there the whole time. Vera never saw any of it. She died before her granddaughter came home, before the notebook came out of the drawer, before the land was paid with the dark, sweet garlic she had figured out behind a wood stove. Her handwriting, though, is on every clean copy in that valley now, and her 6 strains come up every October, by hand in 9 small fields. And the marbled one that the rot took in the wet corner came back the very next year, out of the cloves nobody had harvested, half wild, stubborn, exactly as it always had. That stubbornness was the whole inheritance. The land is paid, the garlic keeps coming up. What is rigid breaks, and what bends comes back.